So, I don't know when this video will be released after I first wrote the script, meaning that it could be days or weeks since I finished season 4 of Star Versus. But yes, I've seen all of it, including the infamous season finale. Based on the way people seem to be outraged by it, you would expect it to be really bad or something like that. But to be honest, I didn't think much of it. Honestly, what happened before the finale was more interesting to talk about overall. I honestly don't really get why so many people were deeply offended by it, so I asked for some feedback on what people didn't like about it, and I've also tried to dig into the community a little bit. But to be honest, I'm not gonna respond to all of the criticism. I don't really have time, and I have other videos that are way more important than this that I have planned. But I'm gonna try my best to offer my own point of view on some of the problems people have with the finale. So the first thing I want to address is this complaint people had about the fact that Star killed all of Magic and how that came out of nowhere. I don't know why a lot of people seem to believe this. I'm pretty sure it was made pretty clear why this happened. I remember back in the finale of season 1 when Toffee made Star destroy her wand, which at the time made him distinct from other villains like Ludo, who more so wanted to hold the power of the wand instead of destroying it. And I think now that we've gotten to know more about the history of this world, it's a lot easier to understand why. Magic has been exploited and abused in ways that led to a lot of bad blood. Despite it being used as a way to protect the human against monster threats, it's also the thing that kept escalating the conflicts within each other. In fact, it's very similar to how chakra had an impact in Naruto, in which Hagoromo almost spread chakra to the human civilization as a way to settle conflicts, but doing so ended up leading to more violent wars once the people began to abuse the powers they had now inherited. It's literally the exact same deal in Muni. I mean, in this very finale, the main antagonists were using Solarian magic, something that once used to attack a person, their bodies slowly deteriorate. This was told to be effective primarily against monsters, but even non-monsters can be damaged by it. Plus, it was flat out said that Solarian magic drives people insane once they keep using it. Then there's also the Total Annihilation spell, something that despite being primarily used by Eclipsa to protect them against the big threat, the power input caused collateral damage that could have easily killed the people around the area. So yeah, magic is a dangerous and overbearing tool for Mumin to have possession of, which can easily be devolved into abuse of power, or just simply reckless usage. That's why Star wanted to be destroyed. I've seen some people say that it was out of character of Star to want to destroy magic, but I think people who say this are mainly thinking about her from the early seasons, when in reality the Star that we see in the last episode is not at all the same as the one we saw in season 1. Ever since season 3, she has been heavily involved in the politics of Muni. She was the person that supported Eclipsa the most in her recent position as queen. She's also been present in almost all of the important big battles in the series and has learned a lot about the history of Muni. If there's anyone who would know how dangerous magic is, it's her. Especially when you consider how a huge part of her arc has been to try to unite monsters with Mumin, and given how magic has historically been used as a tool to fight monsters, I'm pretty sure she's aware that if there's any chance of these two races being in harmony, she has to minimize the tension between them, even if it means stripping away the power that her family has held for hundreds of years, which has been used to hurt and impose power over monsters. I guess if there's one criticism related to this that I might be able to agree on is the fact that the members of the Magic High Commission were killed off in an anticlimactic way as a result of the magic going away. I mean, I guess Glossaric and Heckaboo kind of had their last few lines before they disappeared, but the other ones just vanished without any proper goodbye. Now granted, it's not so much the fact that Star made them disappear that bothers me, because aside from Glossaric, I don't think she even has that much affinity for them that she would decide not to destroy magic. I mean, in the case of Romulus, they did not like each other at all, so it's not like I have a hard time coming to grips with the decision to kill them off indirectly. I just feel like this was a conversation that needed to happen instead of just an afterthought, which is what ended up feeling in the end. But other than that, I don't think this narrative decision was nonsensical. It actually does make sense when you start to think about it. Now let's talk about another common complaint I've heard, which is that the season felt rushed. This one I feel a little more conflicted because I don't necessarily disagree with it entirely, because while I don't think that it was entirely rushed, in fact, there were definitely some plot points that took their time. Like, we spent half this season watching Eclipsa continuously fighting to earn the approval of the people from Muni, but even with that, there were definitely some events that I do believe would benefit if more time was given to them. Granted, I don't think this was a major deal. Like, here's the thing. Star Versus is not a hard series to understand. Despite people who complain about the serialization of the later seasons like to say that the show went up its own ass with its story arcs and world building, in all actuality, Star Versus is relatively simple. It does juggle with a fair number of themes, character arcs, and lore, but it's nothing that will really leave you confused. At the end of the day, this is a kids show, which also means that interpreting and understanding the sequence of events isn't anything that will leave me overwhelmed all the way through. So even if there are some plot points that could have required more time, it wasn't like the amount of screen time given to explore them was low enough to the point where I couldn't comprehend what was happening. I also binge watched this series in a span of days, so it was a lot easier tying everything together, probably more than someone who had to watch this within 2 months. Also, I've seen some people trying to argue that because the show ran in a shorter period of time than the previous seasons, then it meant that it was produced at a faster rate, meaning that it was more rushed. Now look, I'm not gonna pretend like I know what was the production cycle of this season, but let me just say a couple of things. For one, episodes of animated series are produced months, sometimes years before they're actually released, and sometimes networks like to shuffle with the broadcast slots, so the waiting time between episodes isn't always going to necessarily match the actual production time between each episode made. Hell, sometimes they might even be initially produced at the same time. So yeah, I don't think people should take those schedules hyper literally. The other thing I want to add is that during an interview, Daron Nefcy said that often the network doesn't announce if there's going to be a new season until the production of the entire season is over.
But I do have a question. So you said that you didn't know if you're going to have another season. Did you write the season 4 story arc before they told you that 4 was going to be it?
I mean, like I said, I feel like I was pretty sure 4 would be it, but I didn't want to be, just in case, I didn't want it to be so ended that we couldn't do anything else, if that makes sense. But just because, like, getting 4 started, but they don't tell you. I mean, you really usually don't find out. I mean, you are definitely done with all the writing by the time you find out if you're getting another season. At least that was my experience. So
basically, I feel like if there were some things that weren't properly laid out, it was probably mostly because Disney didn't give any heads up as far as when they were gonna wrap up, and Daron Nefcy had to use her own intuition during the production to piece together the season 4 was likely going to be the last renewed season. And while I do understand that this kind of thing upsets people whenever things feel open-ended, personally, as someone who has watched countless 12-episode anime series based on manga that continues the story beyond where the anime stopped, which ends up making the animated adaptation feel incomplete, I'm just kind of desensitized of endings. I honestly don't care that much if some things are left unexplored or underexplored. I mean, at the end of the day, when you write a story that has a lot of concepts in it, unless you're given endless amount of time to produce as much content as you want from it, you're probably gonna end up leaving some things that won't be further developed, and it's just the nature of stories like these. I mean, not every franchise out there is like Star Wars that has been milked to death so hard that it has basically had the opportunity to be explored in multiple areas. This is something that even Daron Nefcy said, which is that a lot of people mad at the finale are probably mostly angry because the series ended in general, which on some level is kinda true, honestly. I think that a lot of people just need to accept that stories eventually end, even if it results in shutting down certain concepts that will never be explored unless you find a way to convince Disney to greenlight the sequel series. I mean, Daron Nefcy sure as fuck doesn't mind continuing the series, so if there's really anyone to blame here, it's probably the executives. Although if you ask me, I don't want another season of Star because it means that I'd have to watch it to update my opinions, and boy, I really do not have time to watch more Star. I mean, I've already received comments of people telling me to share my thoughts on the new episodes of Villainous because I made a video 4 years ago, even though I'm not even a reviewer anymore. Anyway, let's move on to the next point, Moon teaming up with Mina. This is another thing people complain about a lot, saying that Moon was an asshole for doing something like that. Like, why would she pair up with someone as mentally unstable as Mina, even though it was explained in the series, Moon flat out said that she decided to make a deal with her because she believed that on her own, Mina would have done much worse. Now here's the thing, I can't tell you exactly what Moon was predicting would have happened if Mina operated on her own. Maybe she overestimated her, maybe she had good enough reason to believe that she would have gone on a homicidal rampage. What we do know is that before they even made a deal, Moon found out that Mina was already conspiring against Eclipsa with deadly methods. Something I think a lot of people don't consider is the fact that what happened in the final arc was actually meant to be a lot less violent. Moon didn't instruct Mina to hurt any monsters. All they needed to do was scare the village enough that Moon would have to convince Eclipsa to dethrone herself and vanish out of the territory peacefully. Now maybe you could say, well, she should have known that Mina would have acted on her own, but the thing is, I'm pretty sure she was prepared for that to happen since she had a spell ready in case Mina were to disobey her. It's just that she didn't predict that the spell wouldn't have worked on them. It was really nothing more than a miscalculation, honestly. Plus, here's the thing, if you believe that Moon was an asshole for what she did, I honestly don't care to refute that because that's just simply your moral judgment, which to me is not relevant in deciding if someone is well written. You can think that she's the nicest or meanest person in the world, and that honestly doesn't affect my impressions on her because I mostly care about how consistent her actions are to the type of character she is, and I think what she did here actually does make sense. One thing to note about Queen Moon is that she's always had these politician-like tendencies. To her, it has always been less about being an idealist and more about making the best decisions for the betterment of her territory. I mean, for a long time, she ran a government that was blatantly discriminatory towards monsters, and regardless of how you actually feel about that, there are some legit reasons for why she ran it like that. We saw ever since monsters became more integrated into Muni that a lot of social problems started to rise. We witnessed an economic collapse once Eclipsa became queen, and Moon saw with her own eyes lots of Mumen losing their jobs, basically becoming homeless, and constantly complaining about how things were better during her queen days. While I'm not saying that it was wrong to bring equality between Mumen and monsters, that's really not the point I'm trying to make. Obviously, any big social political change like that isn't going to produce immediate positive results overnight, but it is undeniable that Muni was arguably more stable when the monsters were segregated. It's a complicated and nuanced situation, but one that leaves room for us to understand why Moon would likely want to dethrone Eclipsa so that she could try to stabilize Muni again. So combine this with the fact that she had reason to believe Mina would have likely caused a lot of havoc if she had let her run loose, I don't think it should be that hard to understand why she did what she did. Obviously, I'm not saying that her actions were correct. I'm pretty sure even the series acknowledged that what she did was pretty fucked up, but it's also not the only fucked up thing Moon has ever done, and when you start to understand her motivation, things make more sense. I mean, you can't exactly expect someone who became the queen as a teenager after losing her mother, who was killed by monsters by the way, just want to point that out to contextualize her character. But yeah, you can't expect her to be the most sensible person in the world. Anyway, speaking of Mina, I don't know what are people's opinions on this character, so I'm purely basing it off of a comment I received on my community tab. So in case anyone wants to fucking slander this bitch, let me just say right now, she's actually the perfect villain for this season. And let me explain why. You see, when you look back at the previous seasons, you'll notice that the main villains of the series usually reflected the perspective that both Star and the audience had on the social climate presented in the series. For example, in the seasons prior to the third, especially the very first one, the monsters tended to be framed as the opposition. It's what made a character like Toffee so important to be the main antagonist because of the fact that he always tended to serve as a representative of the class of monsters that were in opposition to Muni. This was even seen back when Moon cut off his finger. He was serving as the monster general. But what made him so special wasn't just the fact that he was a big bad evil man, it was the fact that he was mysterious, the fact that he had goals that were beyond anyone's comprehension, which is what made his morality more ambiguous, especially when compared to Season 1 Ludo, who was essentially the embodiment of what people would expect the monsters to act, if they were under the assumption that they're just supposed to be evil. But of course, that was not the case, and Season 3 was all about Star trying to bring enlightenment and human decency to monsters now that she was back in Muni, which is why the season finale villain was no longer someone who was just supposed to be seen as an evil monster, but instead a sympathetic one. Meteor was half human and half monster, which allowed for a gap bridge between these two races, and she was emblematic of the prejudice against monsters that they had been suffering for years. The simple fact that Eclipsa was in a relationship with a monster and conceived a baby was what caused Meteor to miss out on the blessing of growing up with parents and was abandoned by them after they became crystallized. Her rage and sadness are a result of the long historic tension between these two races, one that Star was trying to fix in that season, which is what makes her the perfect final villain. Now as for Mina, what makes her work so well as the season 4 final villain was the fact that unlike the previous ones, she was a Mumin, which was now a fresh representation of the new perspective we had during that season, which was that Mumin, especially the ones connected to the royal establishments, were largely responsible for the prejudice against monsters. You see, what's great about Mina is that she's old. She's an old as fuck boomer that has been around for generations, even dating back to when Eclipsa was still a toddler. Not only is she a representation of the old problematic values that were in odds with the new wave of inclusivity that was moving as of this new generation, but she was also a victim of propaganda. She was highly influenced by Solaria Butterfly, a queen that enforced hateful ideology towards monsters, which can even be seen in a flashback episode when she was trying to convince the public to act against monsters, and it's how Mina got to meet her. She also seems really hard for the butterfly royalty, which has a ton of propaganda. You can see it in both the history books, which was called out in the very first season, and even in the paintings. Just look at how Eclipsa's painting is depicted in a creepy way. One of the reasons why I was interested in Eclipsa back in the early days, because of how eerie the history books had portrayed her. And then right next to her was this horrifying depiction of Globgor, whom you would assume was this evil as fuck dude, despite the fact that he's a pretty nice guy when you get to meet him. This is what Mina has been influenced by, and it's one of those things where it has been embedded so deeply into her way of thinking that it's impossible for her to change. It's a reflection of something that you can even argue happens in real life, in which despite how much society progresses, the bad ideologies still somehow manage to persist. There was even something that Mina said in the last episode that I thought was interesting. She said that even if she dies, she will never really disappear simply because she has good ideas, which on some level is true. Eliminating people like her doesn't necessarily kill off her ideas because they always manage to continue to stick around. Even after Solaria died, her ideas were carried out by a new breed, and in the case of Mina, by the time she left, her circle was significantly smaller than what it was before, but it still exists. Which is why she never really dies in the series, because her being the representation of hateful ideas towards monsters means that her dying would mark the death of those ideas. But the truth is, those ideas haven't died, and they probably won't for a very long time, maybe even forever. The series ending kind of leaves this question up to interpretation, and I think that when you look deep enough, this is probably the most accurate reflection of reality that the series has ever presented, because in real life, we really don't know if social issues will just die off one day. Also, you want to talk about build-up? This motherfucker has been around since season 2 and hasn't even really changed since then. It's because of this that I actually consider season 4 to be my favorite one of Star Versus. There were a lot of moments that I felt were pretty meaningful, like in the episode Cornball where there was a sports fan, and while the Mumin and the monsters were, as usual, not getting along with each other, the kids were mostly just chilling, and it was at a point when Star's goal felt kind of hopeless after the amount of effort she put into trying to bring societal changes, but there were still racial tensions between the Mumin and the monsters, but the kids from both groups were getting along with each other, showing that her effort might not bring immediate change to the current generation, but maybe the next one can bring positive change as long as she continues to push to unite them. Now, there's probably more I could talk about, like the fact that Star Butterfly grew a lot since the first season, and a lot of people kind of sleep on that, but I'm mostly here to talk about the finale. If you disagree with me, to be honest, I don't really care. I just made this video because I promised to talk about the finale in my previous video, and that one was just simply made because I was tired of hearing a lot of ignorant opinions being thrown at Star Versus. But this video legit made me get out of my retirement as a reviewer just to talk about a series that I didn't even really pay that much attention to when I was watching it. Anyway, I hate you all. Follow me on Twitter for Yakuza memes and VTuber stuff. If this video gets 1,000 views, I'll dox myself to prove a point. Have a nice day.